Boker Tov. Today's daf yomi is Nazir Chaf Aleph. So we're going to start on the bottom of Chaf Amabeis, where we're discussing the Mishnah. The Mishnah says if a person says Hareini Nazir and his friend hears this and he says, and me too, Va'ani, and then the next one says Va'ani, and then Kulam Nazir, and then all of them are Nazirites. So on the bottom of Chaf Amabeis, Rish Lakish was sitting, Yosef Rish Lakish Kamed Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya. Rish Lakish was sitting in front of Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya v'Yosef Ka'amar. Rish Lakish says, "V'hu she'tfisu kulam b'tokadei dibur." That's when do we say that if you say Va'ani, you're Nazirite? That's where all of them said their phrase within Tokadei dibur. That's the amount of time it takes to say Shalom Aleichem Rabbi. This was a sugya we had in Nedarim as well. So therefore, it can only be, according to Rish Lakish, 3 people. Va'ani, 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 only 3 people. V'kama tokadei dibur, and what is it? The time it takes to say something within the time of speech. Kadei shayil shalom. So it's the time it takes to greet someone. V'kama kadei shayil shalom. How much is the time it takes to greet someone? Kadei shomer shalom tamid l'rav. In order to a student to give shalom to the Rebbe, shalom aleichem Rebbe. So basically, only 3 people. That's what Rish Lakish says, that it's limited to 3 people, basically. So Amrulay. So Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya responds, no, you haven't given space to the student, because if the student has to stop to say Shalom Aleichem Rebbe, then he's no longer able to say Va'ani. So therefore Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya is saying there's a 4th. You have the time to say Shalom Aleichem Rebbe and also Va'ani, which is basically 4 people. That's so 4 Va'anis. So that's a dispute between Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya. Rish Lakish says you have 3 Va'anis. Yehuda Nesiya says you have 4 Va'anis. And indeed, we're on top of Chafal from an Aleph. Tanya Nami Hachi. We have a Brisa, and the Gemara is going to say this Brisa, according to Tosfos' explanation, is like Rish Lakish. Misha Amar Hareini Nazir. Somebody who says Hareini Nazir v'shama chavero, and his friend hears this v'shal kadei dibur v'amar v'ani, and he waits the time it takes to talk kadei dibur, and he says v'ani hu asar v'chavero mutar. So then he's going to be the man himself who says Hareini Nazir is going to be prohibited, but his friend who waited till kadei dibur and then said ani is going to be permitted. So therefore, this is like Rish Lakish and not like Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya, because Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya says you can wait till kadei dibur and then say ani. So this brisa is like Rish Lakish, the kama kadei dibur, kadei sheila shalom talmud l'rav. And how much is kadei dibur? So is time it takes to say shalom aleichem Rebbe. So therefore we see a brisa like Rish Lakish. Gemara says, well, let's bring another proof like Rish Lakish. Lema l'sayaway, another proof like Rish Lakish. Misha Amar Hareini Nazir. So this is from our Mishnah. What's the other proof from like Rish Lakish? Because somebody in our Mishnah says, I'm a Nazir, v'shama chavero, v'amar v'ani, v'ani. It says in our Mishnah, he says, I'm a Nazir, and then it says v'ani, v'ani twice. Now we're going to say, v'sulo, and no more. And so therefore, this is a proof like Rish Lakish and not like Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya. That's the way commentaries understand it, because Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya requires 4. He says that you can have up to 4 and still be a Nazirite. So therefore, here is only 2. So it's a question on Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya. But the Gemara, but Tosfos asks, well, why isn't it a question on Rish Lakish? So the point is, the Tosfos says, according to Rish Lakish, he doesn't have to prove that you have 3 Tokadei Dibur, because everybody knows that within 3 is Tokadei Dibur. So it's only a proof against Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya, because if he says you have Tokadei Dibur plus Va'ani, that's what the Mishnah should have said. So that's why it's a question on Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya. So the Gemara answers, Tanaki Ruchlo Luchshav Lezel. The Tana doesn't have to lift every single case. He's just listing, he's just going along and saying a couple of cases, but he doesn't have to list all the anis. Gemara says, well, if that's the case, let him just list one. So why does he have to list more than one? He could have just said one then. Gemara explains, you're right, Hachinami, that is true. Mishum Nekatani Seifa, Hu Tarisha, and Hu Trakuam, because the next clause of the Mishnah says, if one of them is released, then all of them are released, because it says in the Seifa, Hu Tarishon, And if the first person who made the vow was released from his vow, then all of them are released. Hutar achron, and if the last one is released, the achron mutar v'kuan asurin. So, and if the last one is released, then the last one is released, but the rest before it are permitted. We call the ikam sai. So it has to say. So this proves that there's a middle one, and mishamachi katani vani vani. That's why it lists at least three people: Harini Nazir vani vani, because it has to match the scenario of one being the last one being released, but the middle one not being released. So the Gemara says, okay, the Gemara now raised another question, but the Gemara seemed to have proved, like Rish Lakish, that it's only three and not four. The Gemara says in this context, Ibayahu, Gemara explains, Chad b'chafrei matfis. So the Gemara says, we have a Ibayahu. The Gemara asks the following question: Chad b'chafrei matfis udoma b'kama mitfasei. Gemara says, are we going to say that when the person makes a vow, when he says Hareini Nazir, and then we say Vani, is the third person who says Vani, or the fourth person who says Vani, the third person who says Vani, is he being matfis? Is he associating himself with his friend immediately before him, i.e. with person number two? Or is he associating himself back to the very beginning where the person says Hareini Nazir? So that's what the Gemara's question is. Is he going to his immediate friend, or is he going back to the first person? Well, why do we care? So the Gemara's answer is the reason why we care is whether or not you could continue to be matfis, because Reish Lakish said, and the Gemara concludes like Reish Lakish, that you could be matfis tokadei dibur, three people. But if you're going to say that you go back to the first person, it's three and that's it. But if you're going to say that it's always chad b'chavre, that you can go on forever as long as you're within tokadei dibur. So the Gemara says, if you're saying that he goes to the person right before him, he's going to keep doing it forever. And if you're going to say he's going to the first person, then and if you're saying he's going back to the first person, then anything more than Tokadei Dibor is not going to be able to be matfis with. He's not going to be able to associate with it. And so therefore, we're going to say that he only goes back to the first three and not to anybody, and it only goes for the first three and nobody else. So that's the Gemara's question. Or is he associating with his friend, i.e., and then we could have it go on forever because you're just going to you have to be Tokadei Dibor within the last one. Or are we saying you're going back to the first person who makes the vow, and then it's limited to three? So the Gemara says, Tashma, let's try and bring a proof. The first attempt to bring the proof comes from our Mishnah. Because what does it say in our Mishnah? Hareini Nazir, V'shama Chavero V'amar V'ani. So the first person says, I'm a Nazir, and in front here it says an I, V'sulo, Midi. And that's it. It stops after two. Shmamina v'kamahu the mitfasi. So isn't this proof that he's going back only to the first person? If you want to say he's going back to his friend, mitvas lisni tuva vani. It should say many cases of vani. So the Gemara answers, Tana kiruchol l'chshav. So the Tana doesn't need to list all the vanis. He's just getting us started. But it could really go on. It's not a proof. So the Gemara says, well, in that case, listni chayv lashmin and kul. So why does it could just say vani once? Gemara says, no, Aidi Katani, Huta Rishon, Hutra Kul, and since the Tana wants to give us the examples, if the first one is released, then all of them are released. Hutar Achron, Achron, Mutar, V'kul, Asurin. Then if the last one is released, the last one is permitted, and all the others are prohibited, and we call it the Ikayim Tzai. This proves that there's a middle one. Mishamachi Katani Vani Vani. That's why I list Vani Vani, because it wants to twice, because it wants to give us these examples in the Mishnah, and so therefore it has to list two cases, but really it could be going on forever. So again, the Gemara is still trying to prove whether or not he's matfis b'kama. It goes back to the very beginning. We're just b'chavre to the one immediately before him. So the Gemara says, Tashma, another attempt to prove this case, also from our Mishnah, Hutar Arishon Utrakuan, that if the first one is released, all of them are released. Rishon, so Hutar Arishon Utrakuan, if he released the first one, then all of them are released. So the Gemara says, doesn't this prove Rishon Hu Desharu? That if he released from the first, if the first one as his vows annulled, then all the ones that come after him are released. I am tzayulo. So, but if the middle one is released, then the ones that come after him are not released. Shema mina bekama mitfasim. Doesn't this prove that he only goes back to the first one, but not to the chavre? And then Gemara says, no, ema olam chad b'chavre matfis. Really, the person is going back to a friend right before him. But because the Mishnah wants to say hutrakulan, because it wants to tell us that all of them are released, therefore it goes back to the first one. That's why it gives the example of the first one. Because if it gives the case of the middle one being released, mystery, then the first one wouldn't end up being released. And that's why it gives the case of the first one being released. Okay, fine. So we still haven't proved it. Tashma, another attempt to prove. It says in our Mishnah, Hutar Achron, that if the last one is released, the Achron Mutar V'Kulan Asur. If the last one is released, the last one's permitted, and all of them are prohibited. It says that in our Mishnah, if the last one's released, Tashma Hutar Achron Mutar V'Kulan Asurin. It says in our Mishnah that if the last one is released, the last one is permitted, and all the ones that come before it remain as a Nazir. So we say in that case, the last one's going to be released, and all the other ones are going to be prohibited because there's nobody after him. But in the middle case, but where there is somebody after him, Mishterei. So then he is going to be released. So don't we learn from here? Don't we see from here that you're associating with the one right before you? Gemara says no. And really, you could argue that he's going back to the first one. And what does it mean when it says that if the last one's released, only the last one's released and all the others are permitted? Maybe it means when it says last one, it doesn't mean the last. Maybe it means emtsai. Maybe the last one doesn't mean the last one. It just means the middle one, meaning to say it's just the last as in relationship to the first, but it's not really the last. And the reason, and since it says Rishon, since it says the first one, therefore it calls it the last one. But really the last one here could mean the middle one, so it's not a proof. So the Gemara again tries to bring an answer to this question. Tashma the Tanya Behedja, we say explicitly in the Brisa, Hutar Rishon, Hutrakuan, that if the first one's released, all of them are released. We say explicitly in the Brisa, Hutar Rishon, if the first one's released, all of them are released. Hutar Achron, if the last one is released, the Achron Mutar V'Kuan Asuran. So the Brisa says explicitly, if the last one's released, the last one is permitted and all the others are permitted. And then it says Hutar Emtsai, if the middle one is released, a Menu Amata Mutar, from there below is permitted. A Menu Amawa, from there above is Asur. Shmamina. So this is a very clear proof. Shmamina. We see from here a very, very clear proof that each one is associated with one right before it and not all the way back to the first one. And so therefore, you could really have an unlimited string of people accepting a Nazir, all saying, as long as they all say a Tokadei Dibur of the person immediately prior to them. Says the Mishnah had said, Areni Nazir, if a person says, I'm a Nazirite, Veshama Chavero V'amar Pi Kapiv V'sari Kisaro. So a person says, I'm a Nazirite, and his friend hears this and he says, my mouth is like his mouth, and my hair is like his hair. Then we're going to say that he's a Nazirite. The Gemara asks the question, Mishum Da'amar Pi Kapiv V'sari Kisaro Arei Nazir, because he says, my hair is like his hair, because he says, my mouth is like his mouth, and my hair is like his hair, then he's going to be a Nazirite. But we have a contradiction to this. What's the contradiction? Contradiction is we stated in the Tosefta, it says, Yadai Nazira or Rakli Nazira. It says, my hand is a Nazirite or my foot is a Nazirite. Muammar Klum, he said nothing. It says, Roshi Nazira, if he says, my head is a Nazirite, or Kvedi Nazira, or if he says, my liver is a Nazirite, Arez and Nazir, then he's going to be a Nazirite. Zakwal, this is the general rule. Davar Shanashama Tuluyabo, if it's something that the soul is dependent upon, then we're going to say he's a Nazirite, Arez and Nazir. If it's something that the soul is dependent upon, he's going to be a Nazirite. So, Amar Rav Yehuda, the Amar Hachi. So if that's the case, why is he a Nazirite? If he says my hair is a Nazirite or my mouth is a Nazirite, so he says Rabbi Yehuda explains, because he doesn't just say my hair or my mouth is a Nazir, right? He says, Yasapi kapiv yain. What he's really saying is, my mouth will be like his mouth with respect to wine, i.e., I won't drink wine. Visari kisara milaguz. And my hair will be like his hair with respect to shearing, that I'm not going to cut my hair. But we see from here a fundamental idea that when are you a Nazirite? If it's something that the soul is dependent upon, that a person who wants to come closer to Hashem, it has to be something that the neshama tuliyabo. You have to feel it with all your heart and with all your soul. You can't just be a Nazirite with your arm or with your leg. You have to be something shaneshama tuliyabo, and then you're going to be a Nazirite. That's the person who wants to be all in his relationship with God. It has to be something shaneshama tuliyabo. What a powerful, powerful idea. So now the Gemara tells us, if a person says Hareini Nazir, V'shama ba'alav amar v'ani ein li yachol afer. If a person says I'm a Nazirite, and his friend hears this and he says, me too, he's not going to be able to annul the vow. So, excuse me, this case is, I said this case a little differently. If a woman says I'm a Nazirite and her husband hears this and she says, me too, the husband says, me too, then he can no longer annul the vow. So again, what's the case? The woman says, I'm a Nazirite, and her husband hears it, and he says, me too, then he cannot annul the vow. So the Gemara asks the question, so the Gemara asks the question, do we say that when the husband annuls her vow, because under this case, the woman makes a vow and her husband hears it, and he said, and me too, then he's no longer able to annul it. So the Gemara asks the question, when a husband annuls her vow, when she says she's a Nazirite, does he uproot it so she was never a Nazirite to begin with? Or does he just cut it off moving forward? Or Doma Megas Gaius? Or does he just cut it off moving forward? So the Gemara asks the question, why do we care? So the Gemara explains, we're talking about a case, let's say a woman took a vow to be a Nazirite. V'shama chaverta, her friend heard this. V'amra v'ani, so her friend heard this and said, I'm also a Nazirite. V'shama bala shal rishona, the first husband heard this, v'heferwa, and he annulled her vow. Now, if you want to say that she's uprooted the vow, if you're saying that he's uprooting the vow, then we're going to say that she's also going to be permitted, because then she was never a Nazirite to begin with. The first one was never a Nazirite, and so therefore, when he annuls her vow, the second one is going to be released also. The Amris make his guys, but if you want to say he just severs it from this point moving forward, Ishtari. So the woman herself, the wife herself, will be permitted. But the friend who said me too, her vow is not severed, and so she's going to remain a Nazirite. So what's what's the answer to this question? Is the husband miyakar or dilma megas guys? Is he uprooted completely, or is he just severing it? So the Gemara explains, Tashma reini Nazira. Let's say a woman says, I'm a Nazirite. V'shama bawa, and her husband hears, and he says, va'ani, and he says, me too. Then he can no longer annul the vow. Now, the guy is, so the Gemara assumes that why can he not annul the vow? So the assumption of the Gemara is that the reason why he can no longer annul the vow is because if he annuls the vow, then he's annulling his own vow as well. He's canceling his Naziris. And he's not able to cancel. A man can't annul his own vow. He has to go to the Chachamim, the court, to annul his vow. So the Gemara says, guys, if you want to say he's just severing it from this point forward, he's not uprooting it retroactively. If that's the case, to let him uproot his wife's vow, and he'll remain prohibited. So doesn't this prove doesn't this prove the husband is uprooting the wife's vow retroactively, and that's why he can't annul her vow, because he's canceling his own vow as well? Where it says, no, Mega's guy is really, he's uprooting his vow. Really, he's severing the vow. Really, he could annul her vow. He could really annul her vow. But what's the reason why he's not allowed to do it? It's not like we said because he's canceling his own vow. That's not the reason. I knew time of the Lamatzi Mefer. What's the reason why he's not allowed to annul it going forward? Given the Amrullah, Vani Kaman. Because since he says to her, given the Amrullah, Vani, since he says to her, me too, command the Amar Kiyam L'chidam. It's like he was Mekayim her vows. It was like he upheld her vow. And if a husband upholds the wife's vow, we learned this back in the Dharm, that he's no longer able to uproot it. So therefore, if he would go and annul his hakama, then he can annul her vow. But if he wouldn't annul his hakama, if he wouldn't annul his upholding, then he wouldn't be able to reject her vow. So the Gemara says, fine. We're still trying to answer the question: is the husband made for miyaker, or is he Dilma Megas, guys? When the husband annuls his wife's naziris, is he uprooting it retroactively, or is he Megas guys, or is he canceling it moving forward? So the Gemara says, let's try and bring a proof. Tashma Isha Shenadra Nazir. Let's say there was a woman who took a vow to be a Nazir. We're going to get this from the Mishnah. On Daf Chav Daled, a woman takes a vow to be a Nazirite. She separates her animal. And after she separates her animal, her husband uproots her vow. If the animal was his animal to begin with, then she had no right to separate his animal. And so therefore, then the animals that she separated goes back into the flock. She had no right to do that. And if the animal was hers, and the sin offering is going to have to die, because if she separates a sin offering, and then she gets canceled, the vow is canceled. She can't bring the sacrifices of her nazirus after her vows are canceled. Now, an olah and a shlamim you could always bring voluntarily, but a chatas you can't bring as a carbon nedava, can't bring as a voluntary offering. So therefore, since this animal has the kedusha, has this holiness of a chatas, and you're not able to bring it, so therefore you have to bring it. This is one of the 5 examples of a chatas that goes and dies. Basically, you bring it into a house and you close the door in front of it, and you lock the door, and you don't give it anything to eat or drink until it dies. But you're not allowed to kill it directly with your hands. So therefore, this case, we're back to the case of the Gemara. So this woman separated it, and then the husband annulled the vow. So she had been a Nazir. If it was her animal, the sin offering has to die. And if we're going to say that the husband has uprooted it retroactively, why does the animal have to die? She never was a Nazir in the first place. So doesn't this prove Baal Megas, guys? Doesn't this prove the husband just severs it going forward? So the Gemara says, no. I could tell you, really, the husband does uproot it retroactively. So if that's the case, why does her sin offering have to die? What's the reason why the sin offering has to die? So since she no longer needs a kapara as a nazira, then it's like havas kechata shemesu bala. Then it's like a sin offering whose owner has died, because she no longer needs the kapara. And we have a principle that if there's a sin offering, it was designated as a sin offering, and the owner has died, tamus. And that's one of the 5 cases of this sin offering that has to go into the room with the door shut and die, because once it was designated as a sin offering, and she had the right to designate it as a sin offering because at that time she was in Nazira and it was her animal. So therefore, this is like, but now she's no longer Nazira. It's like a chatas shemesu bala. It's like a chatas whose owner has died, and so therefore the animal cannot be brought for anything anymore. One last attempt, Tashma Isha Shenaja Benazir. Another attempt to answer this question. Let's say there was from another Mishnah on Daf Chav Beis, a woman who would take a vow to be a Nazir. And she was drinking wine and coming in contact with the dead. She's going to get 40 lashes. Now, the Gemara assumes it can't be just an obvious case of a woman who takes a vow and she's drinking wine. Of course, it's so obvious. So what's the case? If you want to say the husband didn't annul her vow and she drinks wine, she gets lashes, why would it need to tell us this chiddush? It's not a chiddush at all. She's drinking wine. Of course she gets lashes. Must be pshita must be the husband has rejected her vow. And we say the husband uproots it retroactively. And my sofagis is our. Why does she get the lashes? It must be it must be that the husband only severs it moving forward. Or says no, really the husband does uproot it retroactively. Mishum Kotani Seifa, but because the next clause, why does it have to say this case of her getting 40 lashes? Because the next clause says, hey, for Labala, the next case says a very interesting case where the husband annuls her vow, but she didn't know that he annulled the vow, and she drank wine, unless it shows a yayin, and she came in contact with the dead. And there, there she doesn't get the 40 lashes, so therefore has to set up the foil. The first case, Tanya Nami, Rachis, so Fegus. Therefore, has to tell us the first case if she gets lashes. So the Gemara is still not answering this question whether or not the husband is miyaker, aker, or megas, guys, whether uproots it retroactively or just severs it moving forward. We'll stop here with today's Daf Yomi. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to address it.